Okay, good afternoon. My Rav Weiss, and I particularly welcome the doctors and healthcare professionals who have come onto this call on short notice. My name is Shlomo Gottesman, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Torah Project Commission of Agudas Yisrael. We want to thank Hagoyin Balminchas Usher for coming on very short notice, despite all his tremendous dice as one of the senior medical poskim in Eretz Yisrael. And just a note to our participants. I'm sure the Rav will accentuate this in answers to the questions, but these are Dvarim Ha'imdim Berume Shel Olam, and they also are obviously extremely fact-intensive and often location-intensive. Different jurisdictions, different hospitals, and maybe different countries have different ways of doing things. So please take this as general advisement and halacha. Specifically, you need to tailor the facts and ask your paisik. And if there are questions, we'll be happy to submit them to the Rav after the fact. We tried to get in as many questions as came in as of very late last night. Some more came in today. And I think we'll be able to cover as many as we can in the short time that is available to us. Okay, so I'm going to ask the Rav the questions, and the Rav will answer as he feels is proper. We're going to start with the most chomerdik set of questions, which are those questions directly related to Pekuach Nefesh and triage. There are four general questions here, which I'm going to, with the Rav's permission, lay them all out, because I'm sure they overlap, and therefore the Rav will be able to address all the triage questions directly. Question number one. In today's situation, several chaylim show up at once in an emergency room, and there are not enough ventilators. So what is the Seder Kadima for chaylim? Is it calibrated by age, condition, kar levade that can be saved? What are the issues of Kadima, and how are they graded al pi sveikos? Question number two. If older people or sicker people come in and younger ones are not lefanenu, they're not there yet, but in today's matzav we are barur, it's vade, they are coming. Is that considered a vade? They're all lefanenu, and how does the doctor and halacha decide how to allocate scarce resources? Question number three. Under what circumstances can a physician say he's mechuyev to defy directives of hospitals under halacha? There are numerous DNR questions which have come in here, so I will lump them all together in this one question. And does your job security play into it, your ability to help patients in the future? And the fourth question is, many hospitals are asking, directing physicians not to do CPR in COVID patients. What is the halacha b'negei to Pekuach Nefesh in this question? Adkan.
So let me make a short and general introduction. We never really thought that we will need to deal with these questions. And this is such a troublesome tkufa. For many years, I've been writing about Kedima in Atzalas Nefoshes. For many years, I've been dealing with a very famous shaila, whether a patient could bring tefillin into the hospital when he knows that he can't take them out and they will be burnt in the hospital, and many, many similar questions which we never dreamed we will have to deal with halacha l'maisa. But we are. And many of these questions have become very, very relevant. And it's frightening. For a posek to have to deal with questions that will determine mi yichya v'mi yamos is really frightening. It's terrifying. And for these type of shailas, we need the Ramban and the Rashba. But we don't have the Ramban and the Rashba, and someone needs to step up and deal with these questions and give guidance. So we really need to daven for tremendous siyata d'shmaya, and with tremendous humility and humbleness, stand before Kodesh Baruch Hu and asking He should give us guidance and siyata d'shmaya shalom nekosher b'dvar halacha. Because if chas v'sholom we are nichshel b'dvar halacha, we're dealing with halachas which are achamurim shebet Torah. We're dealing with questions of life and death. But we cannot shy away. And it is our responsibility and obligation. So I stand before you like a shliach tzibur musaf in Yom Kippur, starting his tefillah with Hineni ha'oni memas nir ash v'nifchad. And that's the way I feel in this past week or 2 weeks, answering shilas day and night from all over the world, many of them really dealing with questions of chayim v'mavis. So I will relate to the 4 questions presented by Rabbi Gottesman. Brief response, because this is not a Lamdish shiur, and I'm sure that all the doctors and medical professionals that are listening to us are either extremely busy, rushing to their jobs, or extremely exhausted, and they desperately need some rest. And therefore, I won't delve into the depth of the sugyas and lamdis, and I'll try to be as precise and clear and brief as possible. So it is very popular in the Haredi community to focus and emphasize on the difference between the modern world and halacha. What I say now probably will surprise many of you. We don't really stand that much apart. Yes, we have disagreements, but by far and large, halacha would coincide with the basic approach of modern medical ethics. So we do have a sugya at the end of Hoirius dealing with priorities. And a Kohen comes before a Levi, and a Levi comes before Yisrael, and a man comes before a woman, but that is only when we're dealing with tzedakah, not when we deal directly in the medical field with saving lives. And when we need to decide who's going to get the ventilator and who is going to get our attention because we don't have enough personnel, ventilators, staff, etc. The 2 basic principles would be, who are the ones that need our immediate attention, and who are the ones that could wait? Those whose lives are in immediate danger, they have priority before others that are relatively in a better state, and we could wait. The other priority is those that we have the best chance of saving. So 2 patients come into the emergency room. One is desperately ill, and he's not over the brink, but there's a slim chance that we could save his life. And in others, life is also in immediate danger. He needs our immediate attention, but there's a far better chance that we could save him. Then we will treat the one that has a better chance of survival. So the 2 fundamental principles are whose life is in immediate danger and which are the ones we have a better chance of saving. Age is not a factor. And al pi halacha, age would make no difference because nobody has a guarantee on life. One person could be 70 years old and we don't know. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu plans to give him another 30 years of life. Another person comes in, he's 40 years old. And what do we know? Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a koitzev Chayim lekol chai. So age would not be a factor. I saw some Rabbonim writing that a person that is of a greater service to the community should have priority. I disagree with that. Who is the one to decide who is of a greater service to the community and who not? In practical halacha, the only two criteria would be who are the ones whose life is in immediate danger, who are the ones that have the better chances for survival. Question number 2, which mamish is intertwined with my response to question number 1. So the Noida B'Yehud, in a very famous tshuva, Yoredeya Tinyona Reish Yud, sets forth the principle of Choyle B'Fonenu. And he says, Pikuach Nefesh overrides Shabbos only if there's a Choyle B'Fonenu. If the Choyle is not B'Fonenu, that is not defined as Pikuach Nefesh. So in our present situation, a patient comes in, we have a ventilator, but he is in extremely grim situation, very slim chance we could save his life. And we know from our experience of this very same day that in the next hour, another 5 patients will be coming in. And that is not a matter of doubt. We know that probably they're on their way. Would that be defined as Choyle B'Fonenu? Would we put this person on a ventilator knowing that in another 5, 10, 15 minutes, there will be other patients that might have a better chance of survival? So the Noida B'Yehud is dealing with the question, could we do an autopsy in a person to examine his liver or his kidneys or whatever it was, hoping that we could glean information to save another person that might die from the same illness? And the Noida B'Yehud says, no, that is not defined as Pikuach Nefesh. And therefore, it would not permit Nivul Hameis. The Chassam Sofer, 1 generation later, quotes the Noida B'Yehud, dealing with the question, is it permissible for a person to donate his body for medical research? And both the Noida B'Yehud and the Chassam Sofer writes, future Hatzalah doesn't override any Issa, only Choyle B'Fonenu. The Machna Chaim was one of the younger Talmidim of the Chassam Sofer, and he dares to argue that the primary concern of the Chassam Sofer was Lemigdar Milsa, and he was afraid of a slippery slope by pure halachic definition that would be defined as Pikuach Nefesh. I disagree with the Machna Chaim. It's not something that he heard from the Chassam Sofer, it's his guess. My guess is different. And I think the Noida B'Yehud and the Chassam Sofer are clear halachic ruling. Because as we know, the nature of medical research may take many years. We never know what the result will be. Sometimes after 10 years, we get nowhere. Sometimes we get to major breakthroughs. But that is really for the future. That is not defined as Pikuach Nefesh. The Chazon Ish, in his day and age, before 60 years, already commented that Choyle B'Fonenu doesn't necessarily mean he needs to be B'Fonenu. If we know in total confidence that this will save lives, that is Choyle B'Fonenu. Kal v'choyma b'nidon didan. Even if we do not have other patients right here and now in the department that need this ventilator, but we know that in the next hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, we will need this ventilator for younger patients. That is as if Choyle B'Fonenu. And with all the pain that this will incur, I think we would not put that patient on the ventilator because we know that this patient has a very slim chance of survival And in the next hour or 2 or 3 or 4, we will desperately need this ventilator to save patients that have far better prognosis. So if hospital regulations demand a certain code of conduct from a doctor, and that might go against halacha, does the doctor need to disregard the regulations demanded by the authorities and by his hospital? That is a very troubling question. So the doctor might be losing his parnasa, he might be losing his license and his livelihood. And I think our community desperately needs from doctors. The world needs doctors. And as has become apparent in this crisis, we don't have a surplus of doctors, especially our community. And I think in a way, this too could be defined as an indirect pikuach nefesh. But for many reasons, I think a doctor cannot go against the rules and definitely cannot go against the law. I made a comment before that by far and large, modern medical ethics is not really that far off from halacha. Usually they are quite similar. And therefore I do think that a doctor, a firm doctor, needs to do his best, try to comply with the psukim of our poskim, but he should not go against the law or against what is required and expected from his respective field of medicine and the hospital he is working in. For many reasons, besides diminishing or destroying his livelihood, I also think in a way that is defined as pikuach nefesh to enable doctors, especially in respective fields, which are dealing on a daily basis with pikuach nefesh, to continue to do their avodas hakodesh. So some hospitals say that doctors should not do CPR on COVID-19 patients. The rationale being that when you apply pressure on the lungs and the person exhales, sometimes violently exhales, he might be releasing, thousands or millions of COVID agents, which might be endangering himself or others in the room. And that is a real concern. But if the doctor has protective gear, probably the risk to which he is exposing himself is minimal. And CPR could be a lifesaver to a person who, without that procedure, probably would die, would perish. And this brings us to a discussion which I dealt with in many different sources in my forum, in Shuvas Minchas Osher, I think in Chelek Aleph, Chelek Beis, and Chelek Gimel. Is a person allowed to put his life in risk in order to save another person whose life is in greater danger? And could we quantify these halachas in numbers? So generally speaking, v'chai bohem is not a privilege, it's an obligation as well. Bal korchacha atu chai. Life is not ours to deal with. And therefore, a person is not entitled to put his life in danger to save another. However, when the danger you are exposing yourself to is minimal, and the danger you are trying to save a person from is imminent, is immediate, is a major danger, I paskin based on Shuvas Haradbaz, that is a midas chasidus. Not a chiyuv, but a midas chasidus. We do not do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation anymore. There are better techniques today. So doing CPR, if you have protective gear, I could only assume, and I hope I'm not mistaken, that the risk you're exposing yourself to is minimal, and you might be directly saving a life. And therefore, I think you should do it. But if the circumstances are such you have no protective gear, and you really might be exposing yourself to a great danger, then I think you're probably potter. So this basic assumption that exposing yourself to minimal risk to save another person is essential. I mean, that is the only heter for kidney donations, for live kidney donors. So donating a kidney is a certain risk. It's not like giving $1 to tzedakah. One cannot say it's risk-free, but statistically the risk is very minimal. And the recipient of that kidney, to him, probably is a lifesaver, and therefore it would be defined as a midas chasidus. And the same is in medical professions. I also wrote a very substantial tshuva. And the fundamental yesod, what I am arguing is, every decent society in the modern world expects some of its members to volunteer for jobs that definitely are more dangerous than others. Cops. So patrolling the streets in Baltimore in the middle of the night probably is more risky than sitting in Koil or in the Smedish in the middle of the night and learning Torah. You know, to the best of my knowledge, Baltimore today tops the list of homicide in the United States of America. I know some great, wonderful Torah Eden B'nai Torah living in Baltimore, but probably in different types of town, in different parts of town. Firefighters, rescue divers. So many of these people volunteer to do a duty that definitely involves more risk than normal citizens. So in a Torah-based society, would we dismantle the fire department? Would we have cops that shouldn't be patrolling the streets? Would we do away with the Coast Guard and make away with the rescue divers? Definitely not. And I think some people are entitled to volunteer and take upon themselves a greater level of risk than others if it is a real essential need of society. My source for this psak is Choshe Mishpat Siman Yud Beis. A dayan has a mitzvah lo taguru mipnei ish, and the Sifri says, if a dayan is threatened by one of the Balei Din that says, I'm going to kill your son, then lo taguru mipnei ish. He should have the courage to pass judgment and disregard that threat. And the Bach asks on Choshe Mishpat Siman Yud Beis, Ushefatetem tzedek, is that Yehereg v'al Yaver? We know that only 3 Avedas are Yehereg v'al Yaver, and they're all lavim, not mitzvahs asay. So the Bach says, not everybody that threatens really practices what he preaches, and many times people threaten, but they're not really up to it. And I ask, but some dogs that bark bite as well, and some crazy men that threaten might see it through. So why is a dayan supposed to disregard that threat? Because if dayanim will be afraid of every threat, leis din v'leis dayan, v'lo yenachtu bas l'Avraham Avinu v'ishes le'iu chayim balo. And this is a fundamental need of society. And that is why we expect dayanim. Yes, you need to take upon yourself a somewhat higher level of risk than others. That is what the Torah expects of a dayan. And I say the same regarding firefighters and rescue divers and policemen and doctors. So doctors sometimes, yes, have a higher level of risk. We never would expect a doctor to kill himself or to put his life in great and immediate danger. But yes, being a doctor sometimes would demand a higher level of risk than learning in Kail. So we need to deal with every situation and try to understand how great is the risk. But doctors are expected to take upon themselves a somewhat greater risk than other members of society. And therefore, yes, I am so moved and so inspired by hundreds and thousands, many doctors and nurses that I know that really are working b'mesirus nefesh. And I think that is what the Torah expects from doctors. And I could only pray and daven and hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should watch over them and they should all come home to their families safe and sound, b'brias shlema, and serve the community for many, many more wonderful years to come. So coming back to CPR, if you have protective gear, I think you should do CPR. If not, I don't know, but it might incur an immediate level of risk, which I do think doctors need to take upon themselves. Did I make myself clear, Rabbi Gottesman?
Yes, just one quick follow-up on that, and then we'll go on to the second set of ventilator questions. Would the Rav's answer about the Kadima, would that apply of actually unhooking a ventilator when it's already on someone and giving it to someone else? Is there a difference between the Ma'aseh B'Yadayim in this case or proactive before?
Yes, of course there would be a difference. And you do not pull the plug and you do not take a person off a ventilator if he is already on one. Even though his chances are grimmer and slimmer than other people that might have more benefit from that ventilator.
And even if the hospital protocols would be otherwise.
There might be one exception, but what I say now is not definitive. We need to deal with this as it comes up. Sometimes people are on ventilators and we know that there is no chance of recovery, no chance of recovery. And it's just keeping them breathing, or not really breathing, but pumping air into their lungs till HaKadosh Baruch Hu will decide ultimately to take them home. And some of these people, by medical definition, might be brain dead, but we do not accept the determination of brain death, and therefore we keep them on ventilators. So in that case, if there is a patient before Neinu, and we could save his life, then that needs a special shalas chacham. What I say now is not definitive, but that at least would be defined as a shaila. But as long as a person could be saved, even if his chances are slim, you cannot take him off the ventilator, even though there are others that the chances of saving them would be greater. And if a doctor by hospital regulations is demanded to do that, I think you should let someone else do it. I don't think, there would be a chiyuv. I think a doctor has the right to say, my conscience or my religious belief doesn't allow me to do this, and let others do that, other doctors that are in the department.
Okay, so they're here in New York. They are talking, I'm not sure if they've effectuated yet, about ventilator splitting. The Rav can describe it, since I know you consulted medical professionals about it. What are the halachic ramifications? What are the nitunim? Because obviously it affects each one of the patients.
Yes, to me, this was an entirely new field, and I think to doctors as well. And in this crisis, we are learning new things and devising new methodology every day out of sheer necessity. So we never dreamed that we'd be in a situation in which we don't have enough ventilators. And it's shocking and somewhat troubling and dismaying that a mighty country that has enough nuclear firepower to destroy the entire world 10 times over in 15 minutes doesn't have enough ventilators to serve its citizens. It's somewhat troubling, but that belongs to political philosophy, which is not what interests all us right now. So we don't have enough ventilators. And we discovered that there's a possibility of sharing a ventilator to 2 patients. That can only be done when patients are deeply sedated and they don't breathe on their own at all, and therefore they are clearly and closely regulated. And in that case, we could use 1 ventilator for 2 patients, even for 3 patients. When patients are getting better and they need a ventilator to assist them, but there is some pulmonary function on their own, then in that case, we don't share a ventilator for 2 patients. So splitting a ventilator and having 2 patients on the same ventilator might be somewhat diminishing their chances for survival. There is no proof of that, but theoretically, 1 patient might be infecting the other patient, even though both have COVID-19, both are ill. And we do use a filter between 1 patient and the other, but still, we are learning as we move on. We're learning every day. So theoretically, it might be putting one of the patients in danger, even though there is no proof that that is the situation. So in many cases, we have 2 patients, each is on a different ventilator. And then patient number 3 comes in and he needs a ventilator. So these 2 patients who are sedated will take one off his ventilator and put him on a shared ventilator to free the ventilator to patient number 3 that came in to the department, to the intensive care unit. Halachically, I think that would be permitted. It would not be considered like pulling the plug and taking a person off a ventilator and just letting him die, because we are treating him. We're going to put him on another ventilator. And even if we might be diminishing his chances, that still would be halachically permissible. And it is what we should be doing in order to try to save another person. There's a fundamental chiddush of the Chazon Ish, very famous Chazon Ish, in the Likutim at the end of Choshen Mishpat. So the Chazon Ish talks about a theoretical scenario about a person that shot an arrow from his bow, and we have the ability to turn that arrow in different directions. Well, in the days of the Chazon Ish, we couldn't control missiles after they were fired, but today we could. Cruise missiles and others. But actually, I heard from some of the Talmidim of the Chazon Ish that was a practical question. There was a person driving a truck and he lost his brakes, but he still controlled the steering wheel. And if he would just drive straight ahead, he would drive into a crowd and probably kill many people. He could swerve right or left, but there were people in those 2 directions as well, but there were fewer people. And the Chazon Ish said he should turn the steering wheel, even though he will be killing people whose life was not in danger, in order to save the many. And the Hagdorah of the Chazon Ish is turning that steering wheel would not be defined as murder, as killing. It would be defined as saving. Even though practically he would be destroying the lives of people whose lives were not in danger until he turned that steering wheel. But the way we see that Maisa is, it's an act of salvation, of Rachmanis, and not an act of cruelty. It's saving and not killing. And I think taking a person off this ventilator and putting them on a shared ventilator in order to free a ventilator to save a person whose life is in immediate danger is an act of salvation. And even though we might be bringing about indirectly the demise of a person, it is an act of saving, of salvation, and it is halachically called for. So that's my opinion regarding sharing ventilators.
Okay. Many doctors have submitted related questions. I'm going to try to bundle them together. Does a doctor who is not trained in the relevant pulmonary related fields, but he's a highly trained doctor, let's assume he's a dermatologist, etc., does he have a chiyuv, an obligation, minas chasidus, to come to the hospital and help out, since many hospitals are drafting everybody on staff? Number one. Number two, does a doctor who took vacation on Yontif for obvious reasons, does he have an obligation to come back, even though he's being misaking himself, and it will involve and misaking himself, and it'll involve necessary chilul Yontif? Question number three, does a retired doctor have to come back? And question number four, related, normally we try to defer things to Yontif Sheni. Is this year any different? And can we do whatever we have to, would push the Yontif Sheni and Yontif Rishon?
So I will start from the end of your question. There definitely is a great difference between Yontif Sheni and Yontif Rishon, bearing in mind that Yontif Sheni is a Darabanan. And as we know, a Darabanan definitely is far more lenient, far more kal than a Diuraisa. And therefore, Yontif Sheni definitely would be Yoisa Kal than Yontif. But it all depends on the details, and therefore I want to address the bigger question. So a doctor that's a dermatologist or in any other respective field, he's not trained in intensive care. He's not trained in treating pulmonary diseases or viruses. Is he mechuyev? He is not mechuyev. Is it a midas chasidus? Definitely so. So he took vacation for Yom Tov. So Rabbi Gottesman, the way you presented the question, he took vacation for Yom Tov. Does he need to go back to the hospital, put his life in risk? These are two different questions. Chilul Yom Tov on one hand, or putting himself in risk on the other hand. I was asked 2 weeks ago, at the relative early stages of this horrible situation, by a Hatzolah member whose wife had MC, which is multiple sclerosis, which is a terrible disease in itself, and the immune system is quite compromised. Does he have to keep on doing his job when he might be putting his wife's life in danger? Because if he gets COVID-19, he might be endangering his wife's life. And I said, no. So you do not do your job. So a person does have a right to put his own self in limited danger to save another from great danger. As I said 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, that would be defined as midas placidus. But you have no right to put your wife's life in danger. So I would say a doctor that is 70 years old and is retired, does he have to volunteer to go to the hospital? No, because he is in a high risk bracket, or if he has any medical conditions. And even doctors sometimes become sick. You know, we would love a situation if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would guarantee every doctor to live 120 years and be safe from disease. But in this world of Hestaponim, it's not the way it is. So if a doctor has basic medical conditions or his age might put him at risk, I don't think he is mechuyev to volunteer. is different than a doctor who is serving in active duty. But once again, it's impossible for me to give definitive answers. There is so much gray area in this field. So if your life is not being put in direct and imminent danger, it would be defined as a midas chosidus. But it's impossible for me to give definitive answers. We don't have statistics. It's impossible to speak about numbers. But generally speaking, as I said before, doctors, that's one of the professions. It's all about saving lives. And therefore, as long as you don't put yourself in the line of fire, in great danger, would be a midas chosidus to try to help the community. But it definitely would not be defined as a chiyuv. Regarding Shabbos and Yom Tov, so the Moshe deals with a general question, not in a time of crisis, not in a time of a megefa, but generally speaking, should a doctor try to take off on Shabbos and Yom Tov? And the Moshe says it depends whether Shabbos is hutro or dechuyo. If Shabbos is hutro, then no, there's no point in being home. If Shabbos is dechuyo and you could stay at home, then it's the right thing to do. And I think regardless of whether Shabbos is dechuyo and hutro, it's always preferable to learn with your children on Shabbos and sing zmiris and spend time with your family on Shabbos, even if it's hutro. So I think in a time of crisis, we should put aside Shabbos and Yom Tov when we deal with pikuach nefesh. But putting yourself at risk is a different question. And if a doctor is in a high level of risk and he is retired, or it's not his respective field, I don't think he's mechuyev to volunteer. And especially when he's putting his family at risk.
Okay, we have numerous shilas following up on the Shabbos theme, benegay to the use of electronic equipment on Shabbos. I've tried to bundle them together into a few shilas. Let's start with one. Today, people use digital electric thermometers as opposed to the old style thermometers, which have their obvious Shabbos issues. If you suspect you have fever, which is the Rav knows is one of the symptoms, are you allowed to use a digital electric thermometer on Shabbos? Talking about a yachid at home, not a doctor.
Pikuach nefesh overrides any other consideration, and it overrides Shabbos. So the question is, what are the boundaries of pikuach nefesh? If you have a slight fever, I don't think there's a need to check your temperature, because if you find you do have a slight fever, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It might be 1,000 things. It might be COVID-19. But most patients that have corona or COVID-19, if they're young, if they're healthy, we just weather it out. So if you don't have a very high fever and you don't have any pulmonary issues, you have trouble breathing, even if you do have a fever, you're probably going to stay at home. So assume that you have COVID-19, be calm, get into bed, try to stay away from other family members. And I don't think there's a need to use that electronic device to measure your temperature. If your head is burning and you think you have a high fever, then you definitely should take your temperature, especially if you have other symptoms as well. I am troubled by a trend and a tendency that I see from so many shilas that I get, as if, okay, COVID-19 is here, so we're gonna look for every kula available, even though they're not relevant. So I hear the Bonim say, okay, so this year an Ashkenazi could have kidneys and you don't need to machshir your kelim, and the woman don't need to clear to close to clean the houses, and you don't need to sell your chametz. And we still have the Torah, and in times of crisis, we need as many shiurs as we could possibly have. So we need to examine and deal with every shaila in a very serious way. So measuring your temperature is only the tip of the iceberg. I think the more troubling question is using Zoom and using Skype and using communication devices, electronic ones, to be in touch with elderly people that are at home, far away. And I think if we're dealing with even a remote pikuach nefesh situation, svek pikuach nefesh is matio isurim diuraisa. But some Rabbanim came out with a heter. If you have an elderly parent who is alone at home, so you could use Skype or Zoom to communicate and have him participate in your Seder. I totally disagree with that. So there are some Sephardi Rabbanim that paskin, going back 50 or 60 years, that Yom Tov, there is no problem in using electronics or electricity. It's now really Svar Shigedorim. The Orach Ashulchan paskin so in a periodical that was called Beis Vad L'Chachamim. And today that tshuva was printed in Shalas Tshuvas Orach Ashulchan Siman Zayin. But the Orach Ashulchan had enough integrity and honesty to say, I don't really know what electricity is. So maybe my psak is ridiculous. And he really didn't know what electricity is. And the psak is ridiculous. Because these Gedolim assumed that the electricity is in the wires. We just need to uncover it. And therefore it's like Mavir Eish from one candle to the other. But there is no electricity in the wires. And using any electronic device is a chashash malacha d'oraisa. And even if you turned on the Zoom Erev Yom Tov, it's just like talking into a telephone. It's just like using a microphone. So yes, using Zoom or Skype probably involves a malacha d'oraisa. So you cannot do it just to have someone participate in your Seder. But if you have a person who's on his own and he's elderly and he might be in stress, and having him 3 days without looking after him, without asking how he is, might be a pikuach nefesh situation. His life might be at risk. And in that case, you definitely could and should have the ability to communicate with him. So I think giving a blanket psak, if elderly people are on their own, you could call them, and would be irresponsible. This is an issue we need to deal with in each and every case. And the only basis for leniency would be safek pikuach nefesh, not having someone being part of the Seder. I also am very concerned because once we get the genie out of the bottle, there will be no way putting him back in. And if this year we say you could use Skype to have people be part of your Seder, there are always elderly people somewhere that are uncomfortable, that are in stress, that are in old age homes, and they would like to participate in the Seder of their children living far away. And how would he explain, this year was mutar and next year is going to be also? Electronics and modern technology is a very slippery slope, and I think we should be very, very careful with these psukim. So, leniency could be based on safek pikuach nefesh, and sometimes some of these elderly people might be at risk. Being on their own, 3 days, their life might be in jeopardy. And in that case, that would be the basis of leniency, but not anything else. So it's a question that should be dealt with a posek on a very individual basis.
Okay, let's move on to some questions submitted by Hatzalah organizations and members. In general, maybe I'm going to put together 2 or 3 questions. Can the Rav address Hatzalah questions which he's received, which would possibly change the parameters of the established Hatzalah rules in view of the Magefa? For instance, going back and forth, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the hospitals, etc. How does Hatzalah handle the aforementioned triage questions of they get multiple calls? Do they have a chiyuv to be baidik who they should answer first? Do they answer on the basis of the calls that come in? They are not necessarily always with full information. Another shaila. Tzalis have equipment, oxygenators, etc. How do they allocate them? A specific question, if it's the Hatzalah of town X and someone calls from another place, are they allowed to say, sorry, I can't give you an oxygenator because it's limited to our community? Does it make a difference if it was donated? People donated for the use of the community. Do those rules apply? Do we have a lesama dam reyecha, and therefore they're required to give to anybody who asks? General Hatzalah questions.
When we're dealing with epidemics and pandemics, most people don't know the difference between the two, but an epidemic is local and a pandemic usually is global. But it really makes no difference for a local Hatzalah. But when we're dealing with a mass crisis, like the one we're dealing with now, it's sometimes impossible to be Yoitze Yedei Chayva 100%. So I think we should take it as a given that Hatzalah usually is local, and every community has its Hatzalah. So by basic halachic definition, why would that make a difference? If you have a machine, you have a car, you have medicine, you need to give it to the first person that needs it. But it's not so. It's not so. And I think that will create total confusion, and in the long run, it wouldn't be saving lives, it would be losing lives. So just being focused and having a normal functioning solar branch is of extreme importance. And if we just disregard the boundaries and we say everyone should go everywhere and whatever we have we share with everyone, stage number one, we might be saving lives, but stage number 2 and 3, we will be losing lives and we will be causing confusion. And a solar car will be far away in a different community, and the car from the ambulance from that community will be in this community. And so I think it's important to keep our sanity and our organizations intact. So I think each Hatzalah branch needs to care for its own, as we do in normal circumstances. So sometimes it'll be an awful feeling, I was called and I didn't respond. But I think in the long run, causing confusion and causing a balagan would be losing lives and not saving lives. So I do think every Hatzalah branch has its organizational system, and I think we need to keep those intact. If I am saying something which Hatzalah leaders think is ridiculous, then they should disregard what I say. But from my experience, this is the way I see it. Is there any fundamental change in the way Hatzalah works? Yes, be'ikar in 2 fields. Because when Hatzalah gets a call, the first question is, what happened? And many of these calls are, we could guess, don't really involve pikuach nefesh. The child fell and he has a cut in his arm. So when we are getting calls from COVID-19 patients whose life might be in immediate jeopardy, then I would say the lesser important calls, just give the parents or give the patient some counsel on the phone and just help him deal with his issues. And we should be available for the calls that really involve Hatzolas Nefashos and Pikuach Nefesh. That is number one. Number two is because of the huge volume of COVID-19 patients, we need to be fluid and flexible. And we need to have ambulances dispersed in town, and we need to have them as available as possible. So if in other circumstances we should say, you took a patient to the hospital, stay put there until you get a call. No. In our situation, come back to town, come back to the community, because we're going to need you as close as possible to other potential patients. But besides these 2 points, I think more or less Hatzolah is Hatzolah, and the demand on the Hatzolah members will be far greater in this period than it is in normal circumstances, and their families would have to make a greater sacrifice, and that is the price we pay for Hatzolas Nefashos. So if there are any specific questions, I would be happy to try to respond. Not anything that I could think of right now.
Okay, we received numerous questions Benegay to Hilchos Mikvos and Yerdei Chelik Beis, which we are not going to raise now because they are Mikvos are community, very highly community intensive, and every family by definition has a Pesach in Yerdei Chelik Beis.
But Reb Shlomo, I will initiate 2 psukim that I did give. And once again, you need to ask your local Pesach, but 2 general psukim that I did give.
Okay.
So the Ramah, at the very, very end of Simarei Shalaf of Hilchos Mikvos says that a woman, after she goes to the mikveh, should not shower, should not wash herself, and that is based on one of the Gzeres of Yudches Davar. So the source of this halacha is a Mordechai in Masechet Shavuos, I think, Siman Tov Shinun. And in this crisis, I think women should definitely take a shower and rinse thoroughly as they come home from the mikveh. And it is only a minig, which most of the Shonim reject. So even though the Ramah brings this minig, not in this period in which we're dealing with Pikuach Nefesh. So even if it's a remote Pikuach Nefesh, so I think that women coming on from the mikveh should, shower or bathe and rinse themselves off. That is one psak, and the other psak. So many mikvahs, especially the busy ones, have a major problem serving all the women that need the mikveh, and with all the regulations that are put into place. So my psak is a woman could go to the mikveh on the 8th day, even by day. And even though, once again, that's a psak of the Ramah, Simakuf Tzadik Zayin, that we should not do so, Mishum Sarach Bito. But in this crisis, in this time, I think the mikveh should enable women to go to the mikveh by day, and day number 8 after they finish the Shiva Nekiyim. If there is a need. If there is no need, that shouldn't be done. But if there is a need, then those are the 2 fundamental psukim that I did give in Hilchos Mikvos. So Rabbi Gottesman, let's move on.
Okay, so let's go on to related hygienic questions. Benegay to Shabbos and Yantif, showering with hot water on Yantif and Shabbos upcoming. Returning for, let's start with obviously with medical and healthcare professionals in the hospital, returning home. And then if the Rav wishes to expand that to people, regular people, please do.
Yes, so regarding medical professionals, from the medical information that I achieved, I think it would be recommended, because this virus could stick to your hair, your face, your hair. So even if you're wearing surgical gloves, it still would be recommended to shower with soap to get these bugs, not bugs, with with a touch of humor, I call them bugs, but to get this viruses out of your system and out of your hair. So even though doctors should be wearing hair covering, but I was told that there is a shortage of head covers. And so it is recommended that doctors, nurses, medical staff coming home from the hospital should shower. And because we're dealing with pikuach nefesh, and I said a fundamental shiur 2.5 weeks ago, which I don't want to go over right now. But in times of epidemic, the definition of pikuach nefesh is different. And we take pikuach nefesh to the extreme because it's not the risk of an individual, but the risk of tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of people. And therefore, the mere definition of pikuach nefesh is different. So I do think medical staff coming home should shower. And it's very difficult to shower with cold water and to use soap with cold water. So I definitely think they could use hot water. So using warm water in your home Shabbos could involve two different problems. In some houses, you are directly activating an electrical system. In other homes, the question would only be having cold water coming into the hot water system, and that would be a question of bishul. Ben kach u ben kach, my fundamental opinion is we're dealing with a grama. So if you turn on the faucet with a shinui, it might be a trei d'rabbanan, a shivus to shivus, which would be permissible even for a chol she'ein bo sakana, and especially when we are dealing with a pikuach nefesh, even though it might be a remote pikuach nefesh, but in a time like this, it still fits into the category of pikuach nefesh. So I think, turn on the water with a shinui, and whatever your system is, it's permissible. If you're not a medical professional, I do not see why this would be different than any other Shabbos or any other Yom Tov. But if in your household you do have a person that has COVID-19, naturally, you might be at a greater risk, even though he is in isolation. And therefore, once again, I think it would be permissible, especially when you have 3 days, to shower in the same methodology, turning on the hot water with a shimmy.
Okay, so we received a large amount of Pesach-related questions. I'm going to leave all the tefillah-related ones out because they have already generally been covered by Shabbos. So everyone knows how to daven, and we don't have them in Yonim, which have been strictly forbidden by the Rabbanim. Let's go to some kashrus-related questions. Benegay to Pesach, vitamins, not 100% clear medically that they are helpful for this, but there is some medical evidence that some vitamins, and there is a shortage of kosher vitamins now. Are there any different halachas benegay to Pesach and kashrus this year?
Vitamins, generally speaking, are good for your health. And if we're dealing with vitamins that are swallowed and not chewables, I think that is almost no halachic issue at all. And therefore, especially in a time like this, if we're dealing with vitamins that are generally good for your immune system, good for your health, I think one could swallow those vitamins. It's a sufek b'chalav they have chametz, any chametz components. It's not kederach achila, pochas mikashir. So I already publicized a tshuva long ago about basically taking medicine on Pesach. And my ruling was, even a chodesh she'ein bo sakana, if he doesn't have kosher Pesach medicine, he could keep on taking his medicine. And especially this year, I feel the same regarding vitamins.
Okay, I just will add that some doctors have pointed out that vitamin C and zinc are part of this new hydrochloroquine um, package of medicines, which the medical community is now experimenting with if it works. I assume that if that's the case and it's been prescribed, vitamin C is totally mutter as part of that, and it's a subcomponent.
Yes, yeah, yes, definitely.
Okay. As far the Rav answered a lot of our tefillas kalim and other bir chametz in the last week, so we're not going to repeat that. I think what we're going to.
I just want to generally say, so my son-in-law has been working very hard in the past 2 days, and I hope tomorrow we'll have a digital version of shiurim, shuvis, and some shmus, and I said about this COVID-19 crisis. And I will make it available to Rabbi Gottesman, and through you, anybody, anyone, any medical doctor that will want this kuntas will make it available to Siyata Nishmaya.
Okay, and the Rav also mentioned that we've gotten numerous requests on after your shiur. You mentioned that the new sefer is available digitally too. So you'll let us know how the Elam can access that. So we'd like to conclude here. If the Rav would. The Akarsa Taiv that the Torah community has to our doctors and healthcare professionals and nurses, both of our community and outside it, is ein shiur. There's no way to express it. But wouldn't mind if the Rav would say some divrei chizuk directly to the doctors who, as he already mentioned, are working 24/7, putting themselves in great danger to protect Achenu B'nai Yisrael. And some words of chizuk before Yontif.
Yes, so I too just want to express the same sentiment. I am moved, I am inspired. You don't expect me to use an expression, I'm blown away, but I am. By the Mesirus Nefesh, by the dedication of our medical professionals. I think I mentioned in my previous session that I asked the doctor, how many hours she spends in the hospital lately, and she said 20 hours a day. And that is not a guzman. And these doctors know the risks. And their Mesirus Nefesh and the Mesirus Nefesh of their family is unbelievable. So before anything else, I want to give them a bracha, mu'umke deliver from the depth of my heart, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should watch over them and they should all come back to their families, bebrias toiva, bebrias eisano, and in the schus of their devotion and dedication and Mesirus Nefesh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give them and their families arichas yomim v'shonim, and good health and nachas and simcha. So we are approaching Pesach, and we tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. I don't remember whether I shared this thought with you or not, because I've been speaking to so many different communities and saying so many shiurim, I can no longer remember what I said when and where and to whom. But by Yetzias Mitzrayim, after the Esem Makos, and the Jews already left Mitzrayim, and they're standing at the sea, and once again, they feel in danger, and they cry to a Moshe Rabbeinu, why did you take us out of Mitzrayim? Didn't we tell you we prefer to be avodim? You took us to the desert to kill us all here, and why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this to the people again and again? So even when we have an Nisim, we are always put to test. And we need to deserve these Nisim. So yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took them out of Mitzrayim. And they are about to experience one of the greatest Nisim in Jewish history, Kriyas Yamsuf. But they're once again put to test, and they need to rise to the challenge. And Nachshon ben Aminadav had to jump into the sea, and only then were they zeicher to Kriyas Yamsuf. So this last parsha, Parsha Sav, Eish Tomet Tukad Ala Mizbeach Lo Tichbe. And the Mishnah says in Perek Hey Mesechet Avos, Asor Nisim Nasul Avu Seinu book in Beis HaMikdash. And one of the 10 Nisim was that the rain didn't put out the Eish Al Gabi Mizbeach. That was a miracle. And it occurred to me, why didn't the Kodesh Baruch Hu make a greater miracle that it wouldn't rain on the Mizbeach? Wouldn't that be a fantastic miracle? It's raining cats and dogs. The entire Azora is full of rain, but the Mizbeach is dry. And on the Mizbeach, not one droplet of rain falls. No, that was not the nace. It did rain on the Mizbeach, but the Eish overcame the water. And that is the nature of miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us. He puts us to test. So the Eish had to struggle. It was a struggle, a battle between Eish and Mayim, and the Eish overcame. And that was the nace, that the rain never extinguished, never put out the fire of the Mizbeach, the passion of the Mizbeach. So this obviously is a great Nisayon, a tragic Nisayon. We're losing wonderful people, and so many families are hurt and torn apart. But we need to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu's concealed miracles and Chazdei Shemayim. And we need to daven and pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us Siyata D'Shmaya, and he should take this all away. So once again, Erev Pesach, we are about to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we are being put to test. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a great Nisayon. And we will rise to the challenge, and we will pass this Nisayon. So previously I told you the story about my father's Seder night with Klaus Magarevi. So we've been through greater Nisyonos every generation. It's part of our DNA, it's part of our story. So let us all hope and daven and pray. First of all those wonderful angels of Mesiras Nefesh, the medical professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, all those people of Mesiras Nefesh, they and their families should be well. Kodesh Baruch Hu should send all of those that are struggling in the hospitals, refuas and yeshuas. Melech Oizer u'Moshia u'Mogain. Kodesh Baruch Hu Yazor v'Yoshia v'Yagen. He should protect us all. Kol ha'machlo asher samti b'Mitzrayim lo yosem olecho ki ani Hashem roifecho. Rabbeinu Bachya has a gewaldige comment. V'rapo yerape. We learn in Parshas Mishpatim. Mekan shenitnu reshus l'roife l'rapes. V'rapo yerape is a pei digusho. Ki ani Hashem roifecho is a pei refuyo. So Rabbeinu Bachya says, when human beings give refuas, it usually involves pain, whether it's medicine or surgery, being sedated and being intubated. All these procedures involve pain and suffering. And that is why the Pasuk says, V'rapo yerape b'pei degusha. When refuas come directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's a ni Hashem roifecho with a pei refuyo, without pain, without yisurim. So let us daven for all choylei amchu beis Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send refuas and yeshuas. Uki emeitzeichem me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois. We should once again see nisim and neflois, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send us Moshiach tzedkeinu v'yivne lonu beis mikdusheinu v'siforteinu. And we should be zeicha to be makrav korban Pesach b'mheira v'yomeinu omen. It was such a special schus for me, and I wish you all a chag kosher v'sameach. Kol tov.